Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Hello, what's up, gang? What's
I-
good?
and welcome back, Kay. Welcome back.
I wish you all so much.
It's been a while. It's been a hot minute since we've been here. I'm glad to be back. So just to let you all know, we kind of taken a little bit of a detour, or more of like we're extending the scopes of our podcast. So before, as you all know, we were mostly talking about different topics as it relates to Asia, particularly Japan and South Korea, but we also added in a little bit of Mongolia and Taiwan and China based off our interests and other things that we did with our research. But we were thinking, we may switch it up a little bit. Switch it up a little bit. Kay,
A
you want
little
to tell us?
spicy. Make
A
it a
little
little
spicy.
spicy. Put the spice in the chai. Anyway,
Listen,
sorry, that joke did not land as well as I thought it would. But anyways, I feel like I can never be serious. I don't know. But anyways, in light of what our friend Chai has brought to light about the changes that we're taking, it's nothing too different than what we've been doing. I feel like we made it very clear about our goal and our purpose in terms of where our talks are coming from, and we kind of want to expand that to a more broader topics, and that came into fashion when we decided to include some different types of series. So now we're experimenting this brand new series where we don't really have a name to it yet. We haven't identified it yet, which is okay. But if you guys are all right with it, we're gonna sit here and talk about something that it's on a lighter side, but things have just been resting on our minds that either be related to current events or just some things that just like over time we would just been curious about and just like, hey, why don't we just like talk about it? It doesn't have to actually like go throughout the scope of maybe 2 to 3 weeks. This is just something that can like happen right in a moment. Might probably be a quicker episode, but it's just some jewels that we want to kind of drop in and just give you guys some of our insights and our thoughts about it without being it too heavy, because we do want to say how important it is for us to be respectful. And one of the topics that we're talking about, we put a lot of research into it. We take a lot of precaution and just like care about like thinking about the possible communities that are going to be affected by what we're saying and things in that nature. And so now we're just kind of just like lifting the veil a little bit, getting you guys to know a little bit more about us. Honestly, I feel like this is the best place to open up more of our experiences and just really have a really open and thoughtful conversation about anything. And it could be as light as talking about our favorite types of coffee. You never know. I mean, this is a cafe inspired podcast, so um but we won't bore you all with trying to figure out what our favorite tea and coffee is. Like
that is
that's
not boring. That is
but
hold up.
I
Hold
mean, it may
up.
not be, but I mean, look at my beautiful mug. It says "Live Happy." I hope everyone's living happy. And I have me some vanilla chai tea inspired by our lovely chai. So, you know what's up.
You know what's up. I was going to get my tea, but I got distracted and I wasn't able to get the kettle. So, but I also have like about 200 tea packets of vanilla chai. So I got you next week. I got y'all. And this is from my lovely friend. I was actually part of a conference called BBE at my Altameda, and they gave me this nice, beautiful mug. So shout out to the queens of BBE at Bard College. Thank you for this beautiful mug. I love it. So this is where I be having my tea, y'all. But as Kay was saying, yeah, like this is really for us to engage in conversations that are a little bit outside of things that we were talking about in terms of Asia. It could be in Asia, but it could also be something a lot more like to do with our experience as a particular member of a particular community, or as Kay said, something completely random. So we're really, really interested in doing this. It came also at the fact that a lot of us were very tired. We had a lot going on. So as you probably noticed, Rai is not with us today. We'll love her, giving her some space, some time for her to focus on her, just the same way that Kay was able to do. And so the idea of us shifting was a way for us to really just chill even though today's conversation is not as chill, but it's chiller. We didn't do extensive research, as Kay says, but it's chiller.
Just letting you know that it brings me peace of mind knowing what we're talking about, because I'm not the only one that really thinks about these things. It's just like, what? Like,
right. So basically, to get us started, let me tell y'all how this conversation came to be. So I'm gonna let Kay say what we're actually going to be talking about, but what this conversation that we're gonna have today stemmed from was from this conversation that I had witnessed on Facebook, where there were 4 Black women, a lot older than me. I'm 23, y'all, so they were like 30, 40, 50, and 2 men who were actually in my age range. Well, Kay and I's age range. And they were talking about, well, the title of the conversation was, do Black women date broke Black men? And all of them, every single one of them had said no. Well, except for the therapist. But a majority of them were saying no. And it's turned into a conversation that I personally didn't think was fruitful, because they were saying a lot of stereotypes about Black women. And they were bashing in a lot of different ways, whether directly or indirectly, of Black women, and saying how Black women are too aggressive, or we don't know how to be women enough, and we're too, I don't even know the words. It was horrendous to me. And especially since that they weren't even thinking about Black men, and if Black men would date Black women who were poor or broke or whatever. And I just thought the whole conversation was weird, but it got me thinking about a lot of tropes that we've had in our community. So I'm gonna let Kay, take it from here, but this is where this conversation kind of stemmed from, in our thinking of the tropes that we have of each other and of ourselves within the community, and how that then is perpetuated outside.
Right. Well, I don't even know where to start, honestly, because I feel like we've kind of allowed ourselves to be open and letting the direction of the conversation go to where it will. But I guess just coming from my own experience, I've always viewed that, life was just like a black and white thing, without even thinking about in my mind that, hey, maybe there are some things within our own communities that we have yet to address. And fortunately, through school, I've been enlightened not only about, the racial structure, within the United States of America, but I'm also just coming to realize just some of the things that we as a Black community have already institutionalized, it's not as formal, but I feel like it does kind of carry a lot of weight in the way that we associate ourselves amongst each other as Black people, and how we kind of disassociate ourselves from one another. That be through cliques, that be through conversations about, cliques that kind of formulate through kind of what's acceptable in terms of skin color, and what's acceptable around your ideology about finances, about your ideology about marriage, and religion, right? There's so many different ways that we have kind of divided ourselves, not necessarily in a negative way, but in a way that's been informative for me to realize that maybe there is some work that we have to get done and within our own communities, and that stems from these tropes that have been casted upon us, through our own disenfranchisement, and just I hate to bring it up, but just slavery being one of the main areas in which these common tropes have stemmed from and originated from, because of viewing ourselves differently from one another. It kind of can bring us to a different way in life. And yeah, I guess where I want to start from personally, it's just, I feel like coming from, the recent Meghan Markle and Harry, Oprah Winfrey fiasco of a sort. Not that the interview itself was a fiasco, but I feel like the things around it, the turning of events around it, have definitely enlightened a lot of people about how we're still living in institutionalized racism that's a little bit outside of ourselves, because we don't view ourselves in a monarchy. But to come to terms historically, things are not the same with regards to the way that this institution that they so call, or this I forget the formal name of it, or whatever Meghan Markle called it. This institution themselves kind of like are still perpetuating policies. They're still perpetuating ideologies, even though that they've made it seem that they were open to the idea of having a Black woman become the wife of a prince in the United Kingdom. I think that's just, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but that's not the purpose of this conversation. Instead, I kind of want to like start from also another point of view where the things that I see daily, like my daily examples of like where I've seen our communities kind of like putting one another against each other, unfortunately. And it has to do with a platform that I feel that has been highly praised because it brings some sort of representation in economy and wealth and increase in status for a lot of Black women through their relationships with these celebrities or these athletes that have made great accolades and have accrued a lot of wealth. I come from similar backgrounds as myself, where we might live in disenfranchised communities with lack of affluency, the lack of education, the lack of kind of resources to help us build ourselves up, quite frankly, to put it. Not that we don't desire or motivate ourselves to become wealthy or educated or things of that nature. It's just that our government has failed us so much to the point where we don't even have the access to these resources without having to fight for it. And I see this day in and day out. But anyway, I thought immediately to reality TV shows. And Chai and I have talked about this. And before I jump into my own point of view and the way that I viewed the role of reality TV shows, is there anything that you wanted to add first before I get to that point?
I think because of like tropes, we have very like not completely distinct, but like different points of conversations that we want to bring in to this conversation dialogue. I'm not Englishing right, y'all, but because for me, like as being of dating age, and I actually, if you also follow my other podcast called "This Is Not Information," we kind of talked about this a little bit, where dating because I'm of dating age, there are certain things that I'm coming across, especially certain tropes or certain things that men and women I see have of each other. And so I've been particularly bothered by some of the discourses that I've seen where men and women are essentially, being put against each other, kind of similar to what you were saying in terms of that binary. And in a way, you could see these kind of toxic relationships happening on a much larger scale, especially in like the entertainment industry, where toxicity is viewed as like great, like the ideal relationship. And it's not for me. Like that's not something I want. And I know I don't mean to talk around in circles. I really should give examples. But like something like if you think about Sierra and Russell, and how Russell, I think it was on Valentine's Day or sometime in February, where he was like, his greatest fear is losing Sierra, and how so many men were like, oh, he's simping. Now, mind you, I don't know what simping was until I was learning from my younger brother, who's also in a relationship, and then other people who are older than me, and just their conception of simping. And simping is basically like if you're going hard for a girl who clearly doesn't like you or hasn't stated that they like you. So it's basically giving too much for somebody who's not giving to you. But you're doing that to somebody who you're not in a relationship with. That's what simping is, or at least that's what I heard. No, honestly, exactly. Right. Like men who respect women who are in the relationship they are with, that wasn't English, who are in a relationship with them shouldn't be called a simp, but they're called a simp because I think that there's this like energy of being not even just nonchalant, but just being like go with the flow and well, that is what nonchalant is, but essentially just like not giving too much. And I think there's a lot of that happening in either relationship. And I understand it from a baseline level, because you don't want to go so hard for somebody who is going to hurt you, like, or you don't want to be hurt. Like, you don't want to be caught off by surprise. And I understand that, but I see a lot of men being like, they're just they making boxes, checklists of women, saying if this woman doesn't do this, then she's not the right for you. If like she wears a certain attire, then she's not the appropriate girl for you. And I see women doing the same thing, and I think it in some way it ties into the conversation of tropes, because we all have certain tropes that we have placed on Black men, Black women, and we perpetuate that. And I think that it's very, very problematic. So the thing that I was thinking about was a little different from the celebrities, but we could definitely talk about the celebrities, because I think it ties in, because a lot of celebrities, especially on like Housewives of Atlanta, Basketball Wives, all of these different celebrity shows, in a way, sometimes they mimic, I don't want to say mimic because they're quote unquote their lives, but they have placed these toxic relationships on a grander scale in a way that a lot of people who are following, and if they don't understand what a good relationship should look like, they're mimicking that. They're seeing a lot of like miscommunication happening, and then they're following into that. They're repeating that, they're perpetuating that. So I think what can be said about these as it relates to the topic that I was thinking of is that these celebrities, though that they are real people, they do, if they're not careful, highlight a particular form of a relationship that could be just as detrimental, or not just as, but is extremely detrimental for a lot of people who are watching them. But I do recognize that they're human. I do recognize that as much as we could say entertainment industry is curated, they are still people doing people things. So there is that balance. But I'm gonna stop talking.
No, and I mean, like, I agree with you 100% with the fact that, like, they are human, and then these instances do happen just out of, like, reaction. Like, this is the reaction that are expected out of people who are treated this way. But I think they oftentimes associate that specifically and exclusively to Black people, that even say the derivative of Real Housewives of Atlanta, that be Potomac, or that be Orange County or Nevada, wherever they decide to cast people, but they decide to have a cast that's, predominantly white, than there is a cast predominantly Black. There are different associations to these women, that, like, Orange County might not be viewed as aggressive as the Real Housewives of Atlanta, but they're quote unquote living life under the same premises, right? They all have status, they all have the same access to wealth, they all are within the same circles and networks. Like, that's the reason why they got there, right? That's the reason they got casted, is that somebody who knows somebody knew you, so you got into the show. I mean, aside from the fact that, like, people do say that all of these stories or narratives are staged, there is a realness behind it that makes people gravitate towards it, right? Because if you were able to relate to, say, like, wow, I would feel the exact same way if that was to happen to me, it creates a reaction out of you. But the fault behind that is that they only exclusively relate these experiences to Black women or to Black marriages. Now, Black marriages are not going to last, because do you see the way that they communicate to each other on the, Real Housewives, or on, Basketball Wives? And also, just aside from, like, marital relationships, even relationships amongst women themselves, Black women themselves on these shows, that further perpetuate that, like, Black women operate in cliques, that if you're not fair skin, you're probably not going to be welcomed within this group, or if you don't speak in a certain way, you're not going to be welcomed into this group. Or now they've started to, like, include, like, things about education, like, if you don't have these forms of degrees, like, you don't you shouldn't sit at our table, or if you don't know so and so, you shouldn't sit at our table. If you don't have money, you shouldn't sit at our table. And there are things that we nitpick at all the time, and try to justify, I think, why we react the way that we do amongst each other is ridiculous to me, honestly. I recently had a conversation with my mother just about like how I'm not equally as invested in these reality TV shows because I don't believe in it. Like, I don't believe that this is how we should at least set examples, like you said, Chai, to the younger audience about how to have a healthy relationship, right? Because these shows are built on the premises that, like, well, we talk about it, we communicate about it, we have our problems, but our relationship is going to last. 9 times out of 10, a lot of these marriages on these shows fail. Like, they don't stick together, they don't last because of these kind of money making, capitalistic, toxic culture that brings them wealth, that brings them notoriety and fandom and fame, but it ultimately deteriorates, I think, just like the greater good of what we're trying to do as just like a Black community in general, like our movement. Like, we want these things. Like, we want to have more wealth. We want to have healthy relationships. We want to be able to communicate better, but also don't think it's in our doing. And I might be going off the handle here, but it also reminds me of our conversations just about the music industry as well, is that much of what we are producing, or much of what we are viewing or seeing, that are popularized currently by Black people and by Black culture, necessarily didn't have anything to do with us, except for the fact that we did the art, we were doing the art, but a lot of people are not even gaining notoriety for the hard work that they're doing, and they're further feeding the pockets of these, white CEOs that are kind of like holding everything together. Same way with these reality TV shows. Andy Cohen holds all of these shows together. These white CEOs, these white production agencies, they take ownership of our own image. But then we have the likes of Oprah Winfrey, who has her own production company and is trying to demonstrate a different narrative, a different picture. But is that really all that different? Is that even more authentic to our experiences? And I know that you want to jump in, Chai, but I also think that we've had this talk before about like this other show that Oprah has done where it's challenging Black couples, their allegiance to one another, their loyalty to one another. Is it to debunk that Black couples don't last? Or is it to debunk that like we still have interworkings to do because there's some things that we just have not overcome as a people to have stronger marriages, to have, stronger relationships with one another? Because I think that show I'm thinking of specifically, I don't have the name of it. You're in a long-term relationship for X amount of years. Y'all have never been married yet. However, you're putting yourselves up onto the line to test your limits by going dating with other women, with other men, to see if you actually really love the person that you've been with for the last 12 years. It's ridiculous to me. Like, I don't think that it's necessarily doing the work that we thought it was gonna do.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. For me, like, I haven't seen the show, so I don't really have an opinion on it. My initial reaction to that isn't as on the same line as you just yet, because I haven't seen it. Because I do think that in terms of long-lasting, or not even long-lasting relationships, but people who have been in relationships for a very long time and either haven't gotten married yet or are married, there are a lot of issues that can get swept under the rug. Because I think about like people who stay in toxic relationships and why they do that. And sometimes it's for security, sometimes it's for self-esteem reasons, thinking that they were not going to find anybody else, survival, or just they just can't get out of the relationship at all, or they have something that's tying them to this person. And so for me, like, I don't know what the point of the show is, but I do I do think that there are things that people are sweeping under. Whoa, that scared me. I do think that there are things that people are sweeping under the rug. And going back to like in terms of representation of shows, um, I do agree. I do agree that there are like a lot of these reality TV shows and music are curated by white people who facilitate a certain image.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, you have Black people who participate or perpetuate a certain image. But the thing about it, though, and I was saying earlier before we got on live, is that like I'm conscious of the narrative that these images are. I don't say inherently bad, but like wrong to have rather, because
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there are people who relate to it, as you said, right? Like there are still people who relate to it, but I do think, and I think you agree, that the issue is the lack of diversity in the kinds of experiences and images of Black people. I think that's a big issue for me. I don't watch these reality TV shows if I want something like spicy and random and I'm tired one night, I'll probably put on an episode, but I'm not invested enough that I could tell you all the people. I'm not invested enough to know who dated who did what with who slept with who. Like I'm not invested enough to give you all the details. But I remember I had a conversation years ago with one of my close friends, and she was like, you know, when I want some trashy TV and some good entertainment, I watch Housewives of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
No, my mom does too. You know, and to me, it's like I find it an issue mostly because that there are no diversity, or is no diversity in an image. Because then what these shows do, especially since it's created by a white person, but what these shows do is that they show an image of Black people that not only Black people watch, but other people watch.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have not either have experience with Black people or they already have a narrow view of Black people, they use these kinds of shows to justify the not even just subordination or subjugation of Black people, but just like the treatment of Black people. And as you said with music, I'm thinking like if you are a person who listens to a particular type of music and you don't venture out, you're not going to see the different kinds of Black people. And I say this, for example, like if you're a person who listens to a particular type of soca music, you're going to see the twerking, you're going to see the whining, you're going to see the bust in the air and people talking about it. And that's their music, right? But that's not to say that that's the only thing that's in existence probably in soca. Like for me, like I don't know all the music in soca. That's the same thing with compa, which is Haitian music. That's the same thing with hip hop, right? Like if you listen to a particular kind of person, the more popular type, the mainstream type, you're going to get a certain image that if you were to venture out, you wouldn't get into that, or you wouldn't see. That's kind of similar to what we were talking about with K-pop and hip hop, of like them like looking at particular kinds of people or groups or musics and imitating that or loving that or talking about that, which is why like I think it was Rai who mentioned how when you look to like the K profiles of a K-pop star, for example, and they all say that their favorite artist is Chris Brown or you know Jay-Z or you know like the Beyonce, Rihanna, you know like the main type. But there are so many more artists. There's so many more singers and rappers and things like that who do different kinds of work. And it's about who gets more publicity. And I think the issue is that it's a little bit more nuanced. It's a little bit more complicated. And I think you started the nuance or nuanceness, is that even a word? But you started the complexity when you mentioned the fact that a lot of these shows are curated by Black people. I mean, curated by Andy Cohen, who is a white person. Because when you complicate that, then the question is, do we really have ownership of our image, right? And you did ask this question. I'm just re-axing it. And the question is, if we don't have ownership, who is accountable for the images that we see? Is it the shows, the people in the shows themselves? Because they do want to make money, right? Especially if you are participating in capitalism, they want to make money, or they want to get some sort of notoriety. I'm thinking like Amir La Negra, who became and Cardi B, who became famous out of whatever show that they were on. I forgot the name. But they became famous from them.
Hip hop.
Love and Hip Hop.
Love and Hip Hop. Miami and Love and Hip Hop. Atlanta.
Yes, they used.
I'm knowing.
See, you know it. You don't even watch it. But they got famous for their activities on those shows, right? And so in a way, a lot of these people are using these shows as outlets, as connections, as ways to get into a certain industry, or ways to brand themselves or be more famous or things like that. And others don't. Like I think of I don't know their names, I'm sorry y'all, but there was a couple that was, I don't want to say a threesome because it wasn't, but I think his Peter Guns, he was married to one person, that he divorced her and he married somebody else, and the girl, that the woman that he married is a singer.
Amina Butterfly, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, know what they named, girl.
And I'm just like, But the reason why I point that out is because she didn't necessarily get famous for her singing, her music, because he's technically a producer, extremely bad at it apparently, but she did become known or famous for her tie to the relationship that she has with Peter Guns. So I know I'm kind of going in a spin and I'm going everywhere, but that is just all to say that like it's a little bit more complex, especially when we think about tropes, because if the tropes themselves are created by non-members of the community, as well as the fact that people who are watching these shows are watching for a certain type of thing, it makes it hard to get the diversity. But I know a lot of us want it. But I do think that it's there, not on a large scale, obviously. But it really depends on where we're looking, especially more so in the music. Maybe less in the entertainment and the TV shows, but more so in the music. You can find it. And if the more of us find it, the more that they will get notoriety. And the more that people who don't fit the mainstream image can get more recognition, more love, more whatever the words. And that's what I was thinking. I don't know how you feel about that, Kay.
I mean, you said a lot of interesting points, and then my mind started going off into like our earlier conversations about K-pop and like how it resembles sounds from Afrobeats and hip-hop and R&B and things like that, but yet it's still labeled as K-pop with these elements, per se elements. It's just that, yet again, it probably looks better or sounds better from a different point of view, but again, we don't have ownership over our own image. And that's like the striking thing, or the thing that like stuck out to me the most when you were reminding me of kind of like these tropes. It's like, we all know where it comes from, like why we don't have it, or why we're still struggling to get this ownership over it. And I think it's just over just like power structures, and just like even how we just like recently gotten to a place where we fully accepted the fact that we can have Black people in office, you know, and they're still going to perpetuate everyone's ideas and you know, ideologies, no matter their skin color, no matter where they come from. Like, if you're gonna vote for me because I'm doing the right thing. Don't vote for me or vote against me because of my skin color or my background or things like that. And I just think it took us so long to fight for that. And it just brings us back to our earlier conversation, which I won't spoil, that we had earlier today, and I think would be a great idea for another episode. It's just like really seeing how the world works, like like putting myself out of my own shoes. Like, yes, I'm a Black woman, and I, you know, live in the same community I grew up in. Not have seen as many changes as I would hope to have seen after coming back home from school. Just like, what role do I have in either perpetuating these tropes or dismantling these tropes. Am I walking around in silence being like, well, I'm college educated, so I don't have no responsibility anymore, because I feel like the best way that I can do better for my community is if I come up and then I just leave and not return. And that's the thing. And I think that was a conversation that was had too recently in a reunion show for Love and Hip Hop. And there's like all these members from different Love and Hip Hop shows came together and they sat down and they really talked about our own internal struggles. That, like, yes, we're struggling against the world, but we're also struggling amongst one another. Like, why does Trick Daddy believe that his misogynistic, way of living is the right way of living, and that he feels like he needs to tell his wife or his ex-wife what she should wear, how she should perform in front of a man, and how that's being perpetuated onto his daughters. How's that way of thinking being pushed onto them? But then wants to respect his fellow, rapper or coworker, Trina, for having just like boisterous thoughts about like, no, like I am a woman, but y'all no longer, you as men, black men, can't tell me what I need to be doing in this industry. If I rap better than you, if I do my job better than you, if I make more money than you, you have to release the power structure of your misogyny, like, over this rap industry, because you're not going to get anywhere. And women, female rappers are definitely coming up out of the waterworks and being like, we don't need you anymore. We produce our own songs. We write our own songs. We make our own beats. We do all of these different things, right? Again, I'm talking specifically about the music industry in that like specific scope. But they also had a conversation just about like Black women just like stop beating up each other physically, emotionally, mentally, on these platforms, because it's not going anywhere. Like, we can have our arguments, but do we have to take it that far? Or do we have to like even feed into what these production companies have said to us in our, makeup rooms about what so-and-so said about me? Like, do I have to feed into that? And if I do, that means that my ratings are going to go up and I'm going to make more money than that person. Or do I be the bigger person and be like, you know what, I'm going to fold my hands and, actually work on my career. Like, this is not my career. This was an asset that that shows that I have personality, and that it shows that I can do things on my own, that I'm proactive in this industry that's an entertainment industry that's very specific and racist against Black women. Honestly, I don't think this our industry if the reality TV shows weren't an option. And we've seen that because reality TV shows have become the essence of cable television. Whereas cable television, it was nothing but white women and white men all day long. So I do think there is a benefit in these images, but I'm like now thinking about like, okay, so how can we better ourselves through these platforms that were given to us? And can we then take ownership over and be like, no, I'm gonna be the bigger person. I'd rather this episode be about how I funded or helped co-fund a local shelter in my community that I grew up in, versus letting it be about how I got beef with so-and-so and then she told so-and-so, so now I got beef with both of them. It's like, is that important? Is that the message that we really want to send moving forward? So I think we also have to be cognizant of like our own decisions and activities that we do.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm stemming from. But again, I'm not the best person either. Like, I'm just saying my opinion. I love me some reality TV show because I do think there's a storyline, right? There is something there, right, that attracts me to watch it from time to time. But I don't fully invest myself in knowing what everybody does all the time, who has beef with who, and who does what with what. And when I was younger, that's what I saw. Like, I was in high school seeing and viewing these images, and these would be the celebrities that would come to my high school and, talk to us about stay in school and don't do drugs and all these different things. Like, you're doing the exact opposite on these television shows. So what do you want me to do? Like, how can I be the bigger person in that? But yeah, I'm just like shooting out my ass at this point. But
No, you good. You good. I think you said some very interesting points. And I agree. I think it goes back to the diversity in image, and especially what we want. Not even just our role models, but people who are on these like platforms to do, and how they should how should they should act. The reason why I'm like stumbling is because there's a point that I want to say, but I'm gonna say it, but I understand that it may not be completely relevant to what you're talking about. But something that was brought up to me, it wasn't an opinion that I had at the time, but I was listening to a friend who had it was a very similar conversation to this, right? But it was in line with because you're talking more of like the entertainment industry, and I'm thinking about the interpersonal everyday interactions, which is why I was thinking about dating, because dating is something that we all are going to do. We're all not going to be rich, but we all going to date, and we're all going to experience trips that are going to be thrown at us and how we navigate them. But not just dating, but also just like everyday interactions. And I remember I was listening to a close friend of mine having a conversation with somebody after a viral video had went out of these girls who were in a restaurant, a Black owned restaurant, some place in the South, I think. And the owner had played music that was like twerking music.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm.
And the woman or the individuals who were listening to the music were dancing. They were apparently twerking on tables or whatever, but they were dancing and doing all these different things. And the owner had came out and was like, y'all need to stop. Like, this is not an establishment where y'all are going to act like fools. If you want to act like that, you got to get out of this restaurant. I run a respectable restaurant, and I only want respectable people here. I'm like not fully quoting what he said, but this is in line of what he was saying. And for me and my one of my best friends, we had a discussion about this, and we were like, on the one hand, yes, there's a time and place for everything, but at the same time, one, we didn't see everything that happened in that restaurant. So we only saw that clip, and the clip is the only thing that we see. But in the clip, it was very clear that, he was agitated, he was upset. But we were like, one, you didn't have to respond that way. I don't remember he called the woman whores or something like that, but just something where he was berating the woman. But also, too, if you're going to play music in your restaurant, think about the music that you're playing. If you're going to play turn up music, if I'm eating salad or if I'm eating nice steak and I hear something that I'm like, ooh, yes, I'm going to be like, ooh, yes, maybe not go on the tables, but I'll be like, ooh, like, because that's the kind of environment that you kind of create. If you want, like, everybody be calm and, like, mellow and just engage with the person, maybe jazz or blues. But if you play WAP at a restaurant and I'm eating my steak and I'm going wet, all that stuff. I ain't gonna actually say the lyrics, but right. And the reason why I say all of this is because I'm very cautious, especially since my friend brought up a very good point. I'm very cautious of what was known as upwardly Black people, but people who were seen as more educated or people who were seen as more valuable to society because of financial status. Like, basically people who had more privilege, telling people who are lower in financial or even colorism, like you were lower on the strata, telling them what to do in order to be proper members of society. And my friend, she said something along this lines, but I won't be able to quote it as well, but she said something along the lines of, if I'm gonna be ghetto, let me be ghetto. Because ghetto is used as a derogatory term towards people who are Black and they're in the city or whatever, and if you have a ghetto attitude. But being somebody who is like that, like not me, but like somebody who is like that, they should not be seen as lesser than compared to somebody like me and you who've gone to college. They're still people. If somebody's talking like, yo, bye, Felicia, if they want to talk like that, let them. Like, they're not less than me and you who's been college educated and know words like notoriety, right? And so I'm trying to tie this back into your conversation, because yes, like these images that we see on in the entertainment industry can be detrimental. Is what they are detrimental, because it's the only image that people have of Black people really in the entertainment industry, and they feed a certain stereotype or trope of Black people. But that's what I was saying, like if we have diversity in the images that we have, or these individuals are more than just gossipers, or they're more than just people who are trying to look for a fight, then somebody being quote unquote ghetto or have a ghetto attitude wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, because we will be not only accustomed to it, but also know that same person could just be just as great of a person, just as intellectual of a person as somebody who went to college. Take my other podcast, for example. Not all of us are college educated. I'm not going to say who is not, but not all of us is college educated. But you could see that we could all have intellectual conversations. Just because one is not college educated and several of them grew up in a certain environment that I did not grow up in, doesn't mean that they're lesser than. So I don't know how to tie that in. That's why I was kind of hesitant in bringing the point in. But I just want to bring in that discourse, because I don't want it to be where we look down on people with a certain behavior trait, but rather say, hey, it's okay to, if you're angry about something, or somebody talk shit about me, one way is to be like, fuck it, I don't care. I'm sorry for cursing out, but I don't care. Not my business. I'm going to focus on me. But it's okay if you get bothered by it.
Yeah.
It's okay if you're like, who that girl who talking about me? I'm going to defend my honor. Yes, I can understand that there's certain ways that you could go about it. Maybe not all the time acting that way. But if you get mad at something, it's okay to be in your emotions. I think it's a combination of both. And I think what happens in these entertainment industries or these shows is that you don't see both.
Right.
You don't see both. But I personally think it's okay. If somebody says, oh, you a whore because you Black, some nonsense like that, or you dark skin, you aggressive. One way is to be like, they're jealous of me. I don't care. I'm in my higher being. God is going to handle that. Right. Another way is to be like, what do you mean?
Right.
And those are perfectly okay. Obviously, it depends on the situation, depends on the context. But both, it can happen. I just think both needs to happen for it to be holistic. I'm talking a lot, but I just wanted to bring that point in.
No, and I think you're speaking to the truth of the fact that like that is a very interpersonal experience as well. It's not just whatever is fashion online, and or on TV or whatever the case may be, which is 100% true. I guess I'm just also thinking about now as well, and I won't belabor my thought because I know we're going to end soon, but just thinking about then how do we as a Black community then decide when to because I'm just thinking about the term unapologetically Black, and that's exactly what it is. We're all just being unapologetically Black, no matter the fact of where we come from, what our experiences are, the way we talk, if we use African American vernacular or not, if we know where our origins were, that being like Nigerian American, or being from any other place around the world, but just as a Black person, learning to be okay with those traits and tropes. But then how do we make sure that we're not dehumanizing ourselves against one another? I think that's what I'm trying to like get at. Like, why do these tropes exist amongst one another in a way that's not productive for ourselves?
I see what you're saying, but a part of me feels like that's not a way to look at it. I don't know, because I think that like man, I have to really think about how to say this because I don't know how to like the words are not coming to me to say what I'm thinking, because I think that like on the one hand I agree, like right, like certain identities can be used as a way to dehumanize us. But I don't know, because I'm just thinking about like, because you're essentially asking like, how do we as a community stop like the ways in which we interact with each other that perpetuates huh?
Well, that is hurtful and that perpetuates.
Right. And I think the way to get at that is by us discussing all the isms and icks that are in the community. Because I think that like if a Black woman on TV dehumanizes against somebody else because they're darker skin or because they're seen as not fully Black, I think that as viewers, we have the opportunity and responsibility to call them out and hold them accountable. Not just the co-stars actually, but also just the people who fund and run everything. Because especially if you know that this kind of show was created or green lighted and semi-staged by white people, white producers, I think that also puts into perspective. If it was like somebody like Oprah, then it's like, okay, you as an entity, you as a person, we are holding you accountable, and we can because this is your show. So I think that this goes again with the interpersonal, non-TV related relationships, because we think we all need to work on that. But getting mad at somebody who says that they don't like you because you dark skin is a valuable and very authentic experience. So I think because I don't know if like decide was the right word, but like how do we navigate?
No, you're not saying that like now all of a sudden all of the things that are not great doesn't come out to light. Like I'm not trying to hide our problems. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say, then how do we as a people move forward? And like you said, having that dialogue. But I'm also thinking like, is there another way that we can really sit down and really, I don't know, like get rid of these traditional kind of traumatic things that have affected our interpersonal lives, that makes us treat other Black people a certain way when we feel like this no longer applies to me because I've been on the up and come up. I've seen the other side. So like I have no responsibility as a Black person to like sit here and talk to, you know, other Black people and like solve our own problems. I'm just thinking like of these common tropes in these shows where like the young Black girl, you know, comes out of a very toxic relationship with her family that be abusive physically, mentally, emotionally. But she gets older, goes to school, takes care of herself, but then totally disassociates herself from her family because she thinks that they're trash. And then like further negating her Blackness because of the fact that like she no longer wants to associate herself with these traumatic experiences that she's had. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit of a nuanced context, because I do believe in cutting people off who are not good for you. Like if somebody who has perpetuated or hurt you or traumatized you, you are not obligated, in my opinion, to go back to them. However, I do think it's a problem if you associate all Black people with that traumatic experience. That's why I was saying, and maybe we could talk about it another time, but that's what I was saying about like the dating where men who've been hurt by Black women, all of a sudden by one Black woman or two Black women, are saying all Black women are this, or vice versa. I do think that that's a problem. But something in that situation where it's like you've been hurt, let's say for example, a family member had trigger warning, had sexually assaulted you, and members in your family either blamed you or hid it under the rug, and they refused to talk about it, and you moved on, you learned to cope with it, you healed yourself, you did all the necessary things that you needed to do. If you decide to cut them off, I applaud you for that. Because why bring back that negativity?
Right. I agree with you on that part. I agree with you on part. I guess in my mind, I was thinking of a different narrative where you grow up, you probably didn't have as much. You know, you probably didn't have a really strong backing in the way that you would have liked. So for all your life, you blamed your family for being poor, for living in a certain community, and for being Black, until you got older and you saw the grass was green on the other side, and then you decide that, like, I don't like being Black anymore. I'm just gonna disassociate myself from my family. Like, I don't consider myself to be Black anymore. And there are like stories like that, you know.
Yeah, I think that that's a particular situation that kind of goes again about having conversations about what does Blackness mean, not only the isms but interpersonal, internalized racism, things like that, and also too, like, if they don't want to have the conversation, because there are a lot of Black people who don't want to have that conversation. The most that we can do is, one, create the diversity in images, and then have conversations with people who are willing to have it. Because if you meet somebody who's like that, who wants to disassociate from themselves from being Black, or only use Blackness whenever it's relevant to them, at that point, there's really nothing you can do. You can try to hold them accountable, or you can cancel them, you can whatever. But at that point, it's really out of your hands, as a community. And if they come around, they come around. But I think it's personally, I think it's a little bit more productive to bring the conversation where not only is it needed, but it's recognized to be wanted, and there's things to be done, as well as look at an entertainment industry as a way to explore it and not exploit it, but expand it. And if those people who want to be part of the new expanded version of the entertainment industry are those who are like, I don't want to be associated with my Blackness, like 2 years ago, you could say, have you rethought about that decision? What does that mean? And holding them accountable when they're in, if we do decide to bring them back, like bring them back to the cookout, seeing how they then maneuver and navigate that. Like, I'm thinking like people like No Name, who was called out, and then her response was to create a book club. And maybe she still has done a little bit from other people's eyes. I don't follow her, but some people's eyes see her seen as problematic in some ways, but at least people are following her, her actions, rather, not like literally following her, but following her actions, and then making sure that she's doing what she said that she would do, or she's learning as she said she was going to learn. But she showed that she wanted to do that, as opposed to somebody who doesn't. That's my initial reaction to what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you've always enlightened me, Chai. I always feel learned. Sorry. People decide you want to call me now. Maybe that's a sign that we may need to end our chat. But I'm saying that to say that, like I guess I still want to further this conversation. Like, even though it may not come out in this form, but it can come out in a different way, and in the other topics that we have within our podcast. I'm super excited to see where we're gonna go with this. Yeah, how do you feel?
I do. I think that because we have varying ideas of what we were thinking about with tropes, I think that next time we can go more on the personal level, because he was definitely talking more about like the entertainment, and I don't know much about it and I don't follow it, but I do think that like these tropes, as you said, like exist in our day-to-day lives. So I think just like thinking about how does that look like for us, just to expand the conversation. That's why I was trying to implement it a little bit, but I think it could also be like a separate thing. But I'm also very excited to see where we talk about, because we have other ideas. We may and also our viewers, like, if you have any topics that you want us to talk about, that you felt like we probably wouldn't be able to really talk about in our other series, please let us know, because this one is like all encompassing. We could talk about a whole variety of different things.
We went over the entire world with this conversation.
All over the world, man.
We're gonna go
all over. So thank you all for viewing. Thank you to our viewer. Thank you for joining us. Love you. And we look forward to seeing you next time. We'll see what next time brings us, whether we go back to the other series or we end up furthering this series. But thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful night.
Thank you.